All right, so today, let's dive into the fascinating history of Indonesia, particularly focusing on its agricultural evolution. Indonesia is this incredible archipelagic country, right? It's not just a bunch of islands. It's a transcontinental marvel sitting between the Pacific and Indian Oceans. I mean, can you imagine? Over 17,000 islands? That's like a treasure trove of biodiversity and culture.
Wow, 17,000 islands? That's insane. How did they even manage to cultivate rice on all those islands?
Great question. Rice farming in Indonesia has a long history, especially on the island of Java. It was pretty simple at first, just basic techniques, until the Christian era. But then, things took a turn when the Dutch arrived in 1596. They were initially after spices, which were like gold back then. Spices were essential for everything from medicine to cooking.
Oh, right. I've heard about the spice trade. It's like the original gold rush, huh? But how did that lead to colonialism?
Exactly. The Dutch established the Dutch East Indies, and that's when things got complicated. They imposed a caste system based on race and religion, which created a lot of social inequality. Imagine living in a society where your worth is determined by your background. It was a recipe for disaster.
Yikes. That sounds brutal. So, what happened to the local farmers during this time?
Well, during the colonial period, the Indonesian population faced severe hunger, poverty, and disease. The Dutch implemented a forced cultivation system from 1830 to 1870, which meant locals had to grow specific crops for export. This was devastating because it prioritized export crops over local food needs. So while the Dutch were profiting, the locals were starving.
Oh man, that's heartbreaking. So did they ever change that policy?
Yes. In 1870, the Dutch abandoned the forced cultivation policy, which allowed for a resurgence in agricultural science, particularly in rice cultivation. But here's the kicker. They still had this agrarian law that let them lease land for 75 years, which really disadvantaged local farmers. It was like a double whammy.
Wow, that's so unfair. Did the farmers ever get a chance to fight back or improve their situation?
Not really, unfortunately. The Dutch government imposed high taxes, which led to agricultural involution, especially in Java. Farmers struggled to keep up with the growing population's needs. It was a vicious cycle of neglect and reliance on rice imports.
That's just wild. So it's like they were stuck in this loop of poverty and dependency. I can't help but think about how that's similar to some modern-day issues in agriculture around the world.
Absolutely. It's a classic example of how colonial policies can have long-lasting effects on local economies and food security. It's a reminder of the importance of sustainable practices and supporting local farmers.
Right. And it makes you wonder, what lessons can we learn from Indonesia's history to apply to today's agricultural challenges?
Well, one key lesson is the importance of empowering local communities. When farmers have control over their land and crops, they can innovate and adapt to changing conditions. It's about creating a system that values local knowledge and sustainability.
That's really insightful. So it's like giving them the tools to thrive instead of just surviving, right? That's so important.